Today's World Insight. The third generation partnership project has announced a new 5G standard. Will geopolitics cloud this landmark achievement?
Indeed, it's the fundamental ingredient for the various technologies.
And as the world anticipates a peaceful settlement of the China-India standoff in the Galwan Valley, Indian Prime Minister Modi made a surprise visit to the border and took a swipe at China. Will this frozen conflict snowball into a trade war?
We want to take full advantage of this conflict so that to stirring up the anti-China feelings and the nationalism and the patriotism.
Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Let's turn our attention to the development of 5G first. Clearly, the 5G race is heating up and entering a critical phase. If the past few years were about testing and development of 5G technology, this year is the time to showcase real breakthroughs and application. Last week, the third generation partnership project, or 3GPP, announced the frozen in of the Release 16 standard, marking the completion of the first evolution version of 5G. If you've been keeping up to date on 5G technology, you've likely to come across the terms low band, mid band, and millimeter wave. But what do these terms actually mean, and what does it say about the latest version of technology? What's the significance of Release 16 standard? And has geopolitics, most of all, made it more complicated? Today, we'll be invited prominent figures in the field of 5G to unpack the charm and prospect of this technology. For 5G standards, first joining us in Beijing via Zoom, we have Hu Nan, who's a lead researcher and manager of 5G standardization from the China Mobile Research Institute. So, Mr. Hu, welcome to the program. First question for you. We understand whether it is intelligent factories or autonomous driving or AI technologies are all going to be upgraded as a result of Release 16. But to what degree? Can you help us to understand better? And as a result of that, who will be the leaders, in a way, of industries?
The Release 16 is vertical oriented. It means quite encouraging enhancements on a bunch of technology components. For instance, we have the 1 millisecond accuracy of synchronization technologies. We can achieve less than 1 millisecond latency on the air interface and ultra reliabilities at the level of 6.9. It means 99.999%. All these features are designed for the autonomous driving, intelligent factories you mentioned, and also other Internet of Things. But they are not the whole picture for them. For instance, the autonomous driving, Release 16 can enable the communication part and fulfill the requirement of the communication. But autonomous driving not only depending on the communications, also depending on the sensor technologies, AI algorithms and costs and other aspects. And when the autonomous driving, so the intelligent factories, so the Internet of Things become more and more popular, there will be a new requirements. So at that time, maybe the Release 17 or Release 18, we will design new technologies to address all these new requirements.
Sounds fascinating to me, particularly for a literature major like me. But to further ask about exactly what does that mean, tell me more about how the interests are being resolved in a way. Tell me how eventually everybody could come to a common ground. To me, that's mind-boggling, a process.
If only use one word to say what the meaning of Release 16, I think should be the confidence. So the Release 16 delivered on time show the whole industry that 5G evolution will not stop even in the very hard situation, the COVID-19. 5G is becoming more and more powerful to fulfill the requirement from the various vertical industries. 5G is driving everything. It's not a dream. It indeed enables verticals to further push their boundaries and also explore their potentials by taking advantage of the 5G technology.
Mr. Hu, my final question for you. Now we know resource is the most important thing, and the frequencies, you know, the millimeter frequencies, the mid-level frequencies, maybe my word is not exactly 100% accurate, but, you know, just to tell our audience, it's limited. So who will have a grasp of the resources will have a bigger say here. Now, we know that there is millimeter frequency that has been very much a rare item. On the other hand, people are trying to find other ways, for example, making antennas, which is done by Facebook these days, and some of the other things. So how should we see a millimeter eventually will still be the core resource, or there will be other directions which could provide real alternatives to 5G?
The spectrum resource, yes, indeed, is the fundamental integrated for the various technologies. The typical 4G networks operate below 3 GHz spectrum. Well, you mentioned the millimeter wave opens up use in about 24 GHz range. There's clear plenty of extra unused spectrum in millimeter wave to boost the capacity and the data speed of the 5G. But however, the millimeter wave also faces a lot of challenges, considering its transmission characteristics. It cannot work very well for very long distance. In 3GPP, we call the FR1 as you mentioned, the midband, and the FR2 as the millimeter wave spectrum. When 3GPP developed the 5G specifications, both for the FR1 and the FR2, at the beginning of the release 15. Regarding the Facebook technology, I haven't seen it in the 3GPP, but I noticed that Facebook joined 3GPP last year, and 3GPP is very open to all the technical solutions. I believe all the companies in 3GPP can work together to figure out the proper solutions for the FR2. I expect it's a cool technology indeed. Thank you.
It's going to be cool technology, definitely. 5G is going to be really cool and making our lives really cool as long as we'll be able to overcome all these political and geopolitical obstacles. But for now, I want to thank you, Hu Nan from China Mobile Research Institute, who also participated, in fact, in the real negotiation of a 3GPP. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It will certainly need more time for operators and vendors worldwide to commercialize 5G technologies, but something has happened that goes beyond this. Big tech companies have taken a toll by geopolitics. So who will lead? And in this race, who will be the leader or leaders? How far can 5G technology go? Also on this topic, we are joined by two other guests in our interviews. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Also with us to talk about this interesting standard, we are joined here by two guests. In Beijing, Jay Huang, founding partner of Jaystone Capital and former managing director of Intel China. Welcome, sir. And also in London, we have Simon Fletcher, chief technology officer at Real Wireless. Welcome as well. Let me begin by asking both of you, this is being done, 3GPP, with a lot of geopolitical difficulties. Now, was the negotiation about geopolitics, or was it more about interests of various industries, be it telecom companies or hardware companies? Mr. Fletcher, what do you think?
The advantage that 3GPP has as an organization is the vast majority of people working on the standard are apolitical. It's very much driven by commercial needs. It's generally evidence-based decision making. So you need, for new features to be introduced, it's about evaluating the technology. It's about looking at the benefits in the broadest sense, consensus building, and the issues around trade are not generally discussed, certainly not in the technical meetings, and there may be some discussion around in the high-level management meetings, but it's generally not influencing the technical standard.
Mr. Huang, what do you think?
3GPP at least used to be non-political, and usually the company there are fighting for their IP, and which patent get introduced into the standard. You can easily see, for example, the U.S. companies and fighting with the U.S. companies. For example, Intel may fight with Qualcomm, and because their different proposal have a different patent behind of it. And that was the previous situation. It was non-political, primarily driven by technology merit and IP merit.
But, you know, fundamentally, why this matters so much? How far are we going to be as a result of real 5G if it can be implemented worldwide, Mr. Fletcher?
Yeah, that question is really interesting. You're really talking there about the fundamental shift now that's happening in this standard body. I mean, there have been previous releases that have taken note of, for example, requirements in the emergency services network. So some public safety needs have been taken into account, and special features have been put into the standard, push-to-talk, for example. But now this question about how mature the technologies and how they can be adopted by different industry sectors, I mean, this is a fundamental tipping point now, and is a real test, because there's a lot of trial networks going on, and you can see a lot of industries that have not been traditionally involved in 3GPP technologies are taking an interest. So a lot of industrial interest. Whether that will convert into solutions and industrialization in those verticals is still a question to be resolved by the industry.
What are some of the biggest issues, Mr. Huang, that are preventing industries to go a big scale? Of course, we know geopolitics and also COVID-19. We are having something that we didn't face before.
Usually, we can think about it from different perspectives. One is on the spectrum availability, as you mentioned, and you know, for 5G, and usually the spectrum coming from two segments. Lower frequency part, usually we call the sub-6 gigahertz, sub-6 G, and higher frequency, as you mentioned, the millimeter wave and the spectrum. And in the United States, because sub-6 G spectrum are limited due to the defense usage. So in the U.S., and they're pretty much coming up with the millimeter wave spectrum first. Anywhere else, like in China, usually we came in with the sub-6 G first. So that's on the spectrum and the issues. Other on the technology and the challenges. So for example, millimeter wave technology is not that mature. That's one challenge. And another one is the application part, and which application, and it's a killer app which can make money. For example, 5G, and people say, and you know, the good things about 5G are extremely low latencies, very high and bandwidth, and then coverage everywhere. If you think about put the three things together, that means the network got to be very, very expensive to build. And then you say which applications and you can use for such an expensive network. People can think of the couple of things. One is high-speed download. And you will hear the argument to say you can download a movie in half a second.
Right,
but you still need to watch the movie for a long time, for example. And then for the low latencies, and then people say you can use this technology to do like a surgical operation remotely. And then people come to challenge why you need to do it remotely, how safely you are, et cetera, et cetera. And that's another challenge.
Talking about app development, as we know, you know, over the past years, when 4G was the most advanced technology, actually app development was quite a big issue, isn't it? I mean, now we are going to 5G. Will app still be the logic, or will something else still be the logic?
A lot of the consumer side benefits will still grow through app platforms, and you're right. There was a great deal of disruption with the more classic internet platform players that started to really harness the benefits of that open platform, with apps being developed in a large ecosystem. And it's interesting to see now, a few years on, the economics of apps are difficult. You need to have scale as an app developer. So of course the platform owner benefits, but the economics for the people who create the apps, unless you have a winning app, it's a difficult living to make.
I see.
Now, what's going to happen in the industrial sectors and how they control the application of these networks and how they create the ecosystem of developments that happens to deliver different applications of networks, I think that's still an open question, simply because it's not going to be given that you're going to have the latest iPhone or the latest Huawei phone with an app store as the main driver in that vertical sector. It could be a lot of where we're moving to now is embedded systems. It's different ways of enabling that connectivity to vehicles, to factories. And the apps are, in that context, are extremely diverse. And exactly how the economies of the app ecosystem happen in the future is still open for discussion and will take some time to play out.
You know, some of the factors, even politics and geopolitics, have such a huge impact on apps. Can we see 5G really moving smoothly to give us the surprise that we anticipated it would be? Jay?
I think that's all those are the political and geopolitical fight, and definitely will not help on the 5G to develop smoothly and also globally. That's definitely a negative impact for 5G's development.
And Simon, you know, it's not just apps, it's also about hardware, isn't it? With the debate about Huawei, and Huawei is not the Chinese phone. It's a phone made in China, but with devices coming from all over the world as a result of global supply chain. So if some devices are not going to be there as a result of whatever political or geopolitical reasons, then we're not going to see the Huawei phone as it used to be. So Simon, even about hardware, the mobile phone makers, are they going to see difficulties as a result of this?
Yeah, I think for me this is one of the most concerning things for the industry now. How the supply chains are highly complex, and they've built up over a number of years, 10, 15 years of different component sets, consolidation in the industry. As the geometry on silicon starts to get smaller and smaller, there are fewer and fewer places in the world that can produce the silicon. So you have, in reality, pinch points in the supply chain where there are very few choices available. And that's going to mean that there are going to be some challenging times ahead until the supply chain, different players enter the market, new providers emerge. We are going to see a period of disruption. It may increase the price of components. It's certainly going to impact the supply of components. And you know, one of the winning benefits of a global market around 3GPP technologies has been, although there's been a licensing regime, the scale of the industry, the scale of the volumes that can be achieved means that the price points have been manageable for most economies. The question is how that will play out now, and it's not a foregone conclusion that it will end well for the industry at the moment.
This is a very interesting, but at the same time challenging, if not worrisome, development. Jay, every country is trying to provide their own alternative because they're afraid. What if there's real political disruption? And of course, they want to have a competitive edge too in the industry. So will this be the solution, or will this slow down our search for solution?
I think all those political interference will have unexpected consequences, contrary to the originators and desire. For example, when United States says, Huawei, you cannot use U.S. companies' chips, and that send a shockwave not just to Huawei and ZTE, but for other Chinese manufacturers. Everybody are worried about, and what if you cut off my supplies?
Yeah.
So then everybody is try to find a second source. Ironically, this trade war, this sanction, actually helped the Chinese chip makers to make a progress. Previously, the Chinese chip makers can only design the chip used in the consumer electronics side. Now they found that the chip maker can sell their chip to the industrial and then go to the automobile side. And this definitely is unexpected consequences to the trade war designer. I expect to see more of these unexpected consequences will come up due to the trade war.
But will quality as a result be compromised?
I think that you look at the things and going why Huawei and ZTE become telecom leaders, and you look back 10 or 20 years ago, their product had poor qualities. But at that time, because of China telecom industry just booming, they gave Huawei and ZTE maybe very small percentage market shares, at 5%. You sell your equipment into rural area. In that area, quality is not that important. And then start from them. From there, they improve their product quality iteration by iteration. That's how they become a world leader. Similar here, and originally, the challenge for Chinese chip maker, for example, to make their product into industrial domain is because previously nobody want to use their chips, so they cannot improve it over the time. Now this door is open. They can get their chips, maybe originally very small percentage as a second source or third source to the industrial players. Once they get it in, and then they can improve their quality and iteration by iteration. And then finally they improve their quality and then become an important player in the industrial and also in the automobile industries.
Right. Simon, I want to shape the question a little bit differently to you, but almost in the same logic. We see, for example, where you are originally coming from, the UK is still pondering on the question whether Huawei will be incorporated into still a contractor for the UK as a whole. So, but uncertainty means cost for businesses. So with these kind of uncertainty, unlikely to settle down within the next few weeks or even months, what does that mean for the industry as a whole regarding 5G's prospect?
I think it's an area now where there's a great deal of concern. You're right. There's a big discussion happening in the UK. And not just the UK, a number of countries have been looking at the situation, and there is little, to my eyes, there's still no consensus as to the best way forward, and it's certainly going to cause a great deal of uncertainty for the operators. I mean, we mustn't forget that, yes, there's the chipsets in the handsets, and they're financed to some extent, although not as much as they used to be, by the operators financing the handsets to get them into the market. And they're very much a consumer-oriented business. But the operators, the biggest financial risk for them is their networks.
Right.
These are big investments, so they have to go generally to raise money on the capital markets, and they need certainty. Otherwise, they won't be able to raise the money to make the capital investments in their networks. And one thing is for sure, making a transition from 4G to 5G, the new features, the new performance requirements is going to require a slightly higher volume of base stations to be in the networks.
Right.
This is a substantial investment, and if there's supply of networking equipment, let alone the handsets, and the duration over which that equipment can be operated in the networks, because you're looking at a 10-year, for a macro base station, should be in there for 10 years to get a return on the investment. That's really going to cause some questions in the market, the buyers, as to how they're going to deal with that uncertainty.
Despite of the fact we're excited about the prospect of 5G and what it means for all our lives, there are more questions we probably have to answer together as a whole beforehand, before that prospect can come true. Well, for now, I want to thank the both of you gentlemen for joining us and helping us to really understand the reality. Jay Huang, Simon